Well, there we have it, folks. If you haven't seen this in action before, you're probably now realizing why I like it so much. This thing is sort of an all-in-one brush cutter that saves me an awful lot of time. If you've seen other videos of mine over the last few months, you know that I'm very short on time. After that big ice storm and that horrible winter we had, I could pretty much park myself out in the woods and cut wood on the sawmill non-stop. But that means I wouldn't get all my other chores done. This thing luckily saves me time on those other chores, so I can get back out to sawmilling. Now this unit here, as you can see, it rotates up on this angle. It also cuts down below, down flat, as you're probably used to seeing. And I think the ability for this thing to do all of that, including the offset in the angle, the negative angle, as well as in front, tilted, up high, I think that's what makes this thing so versatile. And certainly you saw me use some of its positions here today. Now up until this unit came along, I was using the Lane Shark LS4. That's a really great unit as well. Pretty well the only thing it doesn't do is get rid of these horse flies, but the LS4 I was using has all the same adjustability as the Hammerhead. The one thing though that the Hammerhead has that the LS4 doesn't is the ability for me to change positions inside the tractor cab. Now, if we duck our way in here real quick, I'll just show you the little control box that I was using here. You have a look here. Here it is. Now, I have a video where I installed this, but more or less what I've got is I can turn the system on. Maybe we'll crack the key here. I can turn the system on, so that's putting power to the Hammerhead. I can click this to turn the motor on. That'll engage the hydraulic motor. The cutter will start. And then I've got in and out, and then I've got up and down. So those are the controls for that Lane Shark. And that's what does all the work. Now, one thing that's unique about this, and you may not be familiar with third function kits, but this has a continuous flow third function kit on it, which basically allows the hydraulic fluid, which leaves the motor, to more or less go right back to the sump on the tractor without any restrictions. And because of that, we can keep the hydraulic temperatures down nice and low. Keep in mind, this isn't a PTO implement, which you often see on a tractor. This is a hydraulic implement. This is powered with hydraulic pressure from the tractor's hydraulic pump. So we have to keep that down low. Luckily, Lane Shark's figured out a way to do that with that third function kit. And that essentially ended up being an install, which got put on my loader joystick. And then there's a little piece down here, which I installed myself. Check out the other video that I've got of that install if you're interested in seeing how that goes. Now up front here, here's the actual controls, or the connections rather. So this and this is what I connect. This one here, which also came from Lane Shark, this is if you ever run a grapple. So not this Hammerhead, but a separate grapple. In that case, this would not be connected. Instead, you'd use these two for the grapple function. And then inside on my loader joystick, you'd use this and this. So that would be for the grapple. In my case, for the Hammerhead, I'm using this up here. So in terms of the width here, we're cutting 44 inches. And if you haven't seen this before, these actually, if they were to ever hit something and it was too hard to cut it on the first swing, they actually bend backwards, continue around again, and then with that increased momentum, it'll probably hit it again and cut it on that second go around. So these are hardened steel here, 44-inch cut. At the back here, you'll notice it's rubber, so I drag this along the ground, especially when I'm cutting things like grass and the sides of trails. At the very front here, the blade sticks out past these little notches here. So if you have a little tree, you can just fit it in here, and that blade will come around and hit it. You don't have to actually push over whatever it is you're trying to cut. You can just put it in that notch and away you go. This unit here weighs just under 550 pounds. When I have it up in the air, I don't feel uneasy about it. I don't feel like the tractor's unstable at all. I feel like this size tractor goes really well with the cutter here. The tractor's a 2012 Kioti DK40. Those are filled tires at the rear. I didn't have an implement on at the back today. It is advisable to do that just to give you some extra weight. But in this case, even without it, it seemed to work well. I think Lane Shark recommends a 3,000-pound tractor, but obviously more weight is better, especially when you get an implement out to the side up in the air. If you wanted to see how I installed the extra hydraulic lines that came with this unit here, I ran them down the inside of the loader, and then I attached them to some of the existing hard lines that were on the loader. I know I've got to cut the zip ties off. I just haven't got to it. But then it goes down under the tractor cab into that little piece, that little valve that I showed you under the cab, and then ultimately into the sump at the back of the tractor. When I first started looking at ways to clear back the brush, cut down the branches, and I started talking with the folks at Lane Shark, one of the things I really wanted to make sure is that I was getting an implement and attachment made for tractors. Now, if you get something made for a skid steer, maybe it'll work on your tractor, but it wasn't intended for that originally. And so you could have some hiccups, maybe some bad things could happen. This unit is only for tractors like mine. It's not made for skid steers. And because of that, the lower flow rate, the hydraulic flow rate, works well with this unit. Well, I think that's going to do it for me here today. If you wanted to see the initial install of this unit, the Hammerhead, or even the LS4 by Lane Shark prior to this, be sure to check out my videos at the end of this one. I'll also put a link to the third function kit. You can see how I put that in, as well as all the hydraulic lines which come down to connect this unit. It wasn't all that hard, but of course a video to see how it works is always nice, so I'll put that at the end. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to like this video if you did, and don't forget to subscribe. Hopefully I see you next time. See you then.